when he was fighting, sometimes he'd fight so hard that he was thinking that
50 years ago, Sylvester Stallone wrote Rocky in 3 days, refused to sell it unless they let him star in it, and made it for next to nothing on the streets of Philadelphia. And it won Best Picture. The cast weren't household names then, and the years since have taken them in directions nobody saw coming. Let's find out where they ended up and whether you'd even recognize them today. Sylvester Stallone, Rocky Balboa. The story of how Rocky got made is, in many ways, just as improbable as the story it tells. Sylvester Stallone was born on July 6, 1946, in the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of Manhattan, and his early life was defined by instability. A difficult birth left him with partial paralysis of the lower half of his face, the result of forceps slipping and severing a nerve, which gave him the slightly slurred speech and drooping expression that he'd carry into his most famous role. His parents divorced when he was young. He bounced between schools and spent time in Philadelphia with his mother, which gave him the specific texture of the city that would later fill his screenplay. He moved to New York in the late 1960s and spent years struggling. He took whatever work he could find, including a brief appearance in a softcore film called A Party at Kitty and Studs in 1970, which he has spoken about openly as a decision driven by desperation. He needed the money and had run out of other options. He found small roles in films like The Lords of Flatbush, 1974, and Death Race 2000, 1975, and did uncredited work in others. He was essentially broke and largely invisible to the industry he was trying to break into. Then, in March 1975, he watched the Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner fight, a no-chance challenger from New Jersey who went the distance with the heavyweight champion of the world, and went home and wrote the first draft of Rocky in 3.5 days. United Artists wanted the script. They offered Stallone a substantial sum for the rights. He said no. He wanted to star in it himself. The studio pushed back hard. They wanted established names like Robert Redford or James Caan in the lead, but Stallone refused every offer, and eventually the studio relented, agreeing to cast him at a fraction of the budget they'd originally planned. The film was shot in January 1976, primarily on the streets of Philadelphia, with a total budget of just over $1 million. Rocky was released in December of that year and became the highest-grossing film of 1976, earning approximately $225 million worldwide. At the 49th Academy Awards, it received 10 nominations and won 3: Best Picture, Best Director for John G. Avildsen, and Best Film Editing. The franchise that followed became one of the longest-running in Hollywood history. Stallone wrote, starred in, or directed 6 Rocky films and 2 Creed films, keeping the story alive across 5 decades. In between, he built a parallel career with the Rambo series, 4 films across 3 decades, and, later, the Expendables franchise, which brought together nearly every surviving action star of his generation. Along the way, he also appeared in comedies, dramas, and films like Demolition Man, Cliffhanger, and Copland, constantly testing the range that critics had spent years underestimating. Films he has appeared in have grossed over $7.5 billion worldwide, making him one of only 2 actors in history, alongside Harrison Ford, to have starred in a #1 box office film in 6 consecutive decades. In November 2022, at 76 years old, he made his television debut in Tulsa King on Paramount+, playing Dwight Manfredi, a New York mob boss released from prison after 25 years and immediately relocated to Tulsa, Oklahoma by his crime family. The show was created by Taylor Sheridan and Terrence Winter, and it was a hit from its first episode. A second season premiered in September 2024. A third season was filmed in New York City during 2025, with Stallone photographed on set in April of that year between takes. A fourth season was already in development. For a man who had said he didn't understand the concept of retirement, Tulsa King felt like proof, not just that he could still carry a show, but that there were dimensions to his screen presence that the action genre had never fully explored. In December 2025, Stallone was honored at the Kennedy Center Honors alongside George Strait, Gloria Gaynor, Kiss, and Michael Crawford, one of the most prestigious arts awards in the United States, recognizing individuals whose work has shaped American cultural life. President Trump presented the medal in an Oval Office ceremony on December 6th. 2 days later, Stallone walked the Kennedy Center red carpet with Jennifer Flavin by his side. He arrived at that ceremony using a gold-plated cane. His representative confirmed it was the result of back surgery, his 8th. The physical toll of a career built on doing his own stunts had finally compounded beyond what the body could absorb quietly. He had revealed on the Family Stallone reality show that injuries sustained while filming the first Expendables, 2010, had led to multiple spinal fusions and surgeries from which, by his own admission, he never fully recovered. He has spoken about that period with unusual candor, describing the romance of doing your own stunts and the very unromantic reality of what comes after. He and his wife, Jennifer Flavin, together since the early 1990s, made the decision in 2024 to leave California permanently and relocate their family to Florida. Jennifer described it in interviews as a rebirth, a chance to step away from the rhythms of Hollywood and build a different kind of life. They have 3 daughters together, Sophia, Sistine, and Scarlett, all of whom appeared with their parents in the Paramount Plus reality series, The Family Stallone. At 79 years old in 2026, Stallone is still working, still showing up, and, by his own description, still built for creative war. Talia Shire, Adrian Panino. She came to Rocky already carrying the weight of one of the most iconic films ever made. Talia Shire had played Connie Corleone in The Godfather, 1972, and The Godfather Part 2, 1974, and had received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for her work in the sequel. She was already a respected presence in American cinema when John Avildsen cast her as Adrian Panino, the quiet, bookish, emotionally reserved woman who worked in a pet store and fell in love with a Philadelphia club fighter. Born Talia Rose Coppola on April 25, 1946 in Lake Success, New York, she grew up in a family where creativity was simply the air everyone breathed. Her father, Carmine Coppola, was a composer and conductor. Her brother, Francis Ford Coppola, would become one of the most celebrated film directors in American history. Her nephew, Nicolas Cage, changed his surname to distance himself from the family name. Her niece, Sofia Coppola, became a celebrated writer-director in her own right. Talia adopted the name Shire professionally, the surname of her first husband, composer David Shire, specifically to create distance from the family name. She was determined to earn her place on her own terms. Her performance as Adrian in Rocky was quiet and precise. A woman who had learned to make herself small and was slowly finding, through Rocky's eyes on her, a reason to take up more space in the world. Stallone has recalled that when he was having difficulty casting the role, he remembered her from The Godfather and asked her to come in. She arrived wearing glasses, with short, dark hair, almost the opposite of what he'd originally pictured, and the moment he saw her, he knew. The film recognized her performance with an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and a Golden Globe nomination in the same category. The character became one of the most beloved in the entire franchise, and Shire returned to the role in 4 subsequent Rocky films. When Stallone wrote Rocky Balboa in 2006, the two of them agreed together that Adrian should have died before the film begins, a decision that gave the older Rocky his essential loneliness and motivation. Her second marriage to film producer Jack Schwartzman brought her 2 more sons, actor Jason Schwartzman and musician Robert Carmine, and ended in tragedy when Schwartzman died of pancreatic cancer in June 1994, while Shire was in post-production on a film she had directed herself, One Night Stand, 1995. She has spoken about that period as one of the most difficult of her life. The grief of losing a husband layered over the responsibilities of finishing a project she had taken on as a director. She kept working anyway, and has continued doing so across the decades since. In her later years, she made appearances in smaller independent films while staying connected to the creative family around her. In her later years, she made appearances in smaller independent films while continuing to be drawn back into the world of her most famous family. In 2024, she appeared in her brother Francis's ambitious and controversial film, Megalopolis. In 2025, she had a role in the film Nonas, a 2026 documentary about songwriter Carol Connors, who co-wrote the Rocky theme Gonna Fly Now, called Elvis, Rocky and Me, also featured Shire. Now 80 years old, she lives in Southern California, keeps a relatively low profile, and remains a member of one of the most creatively interwoven families in the history of American film. Her sons have built careers of their own. Her legacy in two of the most enduring franchises in Hollywood, The Godfather and Rocky, is as secure as any actors could be. Carl Weathers, Apollo Creed. He was born on January 14, 1948, in New Orleans, Louisiana, and he spent his early adulthood playing professional football. 2 seasons as a linebacker with the Oakland Raiders in the NFL, followed by time in the Canadian Football League with the BC Lions. He left football in the mid-1970s to pursue acting, and the transition wasn't guaranteed to work. The entertainment industry had no particular plan for an ex-footballer with no film credits, but Weathers was relentless about it, studying the craft and pursuing every audition he could find. In 1976, he walked into an audition to play the world heavyweight champion who gives Rocky Balboa his shot. Stallone has described the first time he saw Carl Weathers in the audition room, saying he recognized something in him immediately, a physical presence and a magnetic quality that made Apollo Creed feel not just like an opponent, but like a force of nature. Weathers brought a swagger, a showmanship, and a charisma to the role that made Apollo one of the most compelling characters in the film. The character was inspired in part by Muhammad Ali, and Weathers captured something of that: the performance, the theater of being a champion, the sense that the real show was happening before the first bell even rang. He reprised the role in Rocky II, Rocky III, and Rocky IV, and in the 4th film, Apollo Creed died in the ring, a dramatic death that set the emotional foundation for everything that followed in the franchise, including the Creed series that launched in 2015. After Rocky, Weathers built a career playing strong, commanding roles across action films and television. He appeared opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator 1987 and became a pop culture touchstone in Adam Sandler's Happy Gilmore 1996. Playing Chubbs Peterson, the title character's one-handed mentor. Both performances developed devoted followings entirely separate from the Rocky franchise. In his later career, he returned to television in a major way. He appeared in the Star Wars streaming series The Mandalorian as Greef Karga, the leader of the Bounty Hunters Guild, a role that introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans who had grown up well after the Rocky era. He received an Emmy nomination for the role and also stepped behind the camera, directing multiple episodes of the series, demonstrating a command of storytelling that his co-stars and the show's producers spoke about with genuine admiration. Pedro Pascal, who starred in the series, paid tribute to him warmly after his death. On February 2nd, 2024, Carl Weathers died peacefully in his sleep at his home in Venice, California. He was 76. His official cause of death was listed as atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, a condition caused by plaque buildup in the arteries that had been progressing silently for years. There had been no public reports of serious illness before his death, and the news shocked people who had just seen him active and working in The Mandalorian. His family released a statement describing him as an exceptional human being who lived an extraordinary life, and noted his influence across generations and across every corner of the arts and sports he had touched. Stallone was visibly shaken when he paid tribute publicly, posting a video in which he struggled to hold himself together. He described Weathers as an intricate part of his success, said that when he first saw him, he knew he was looking at greatness, and added that he hadn't fully realized just how great until much later. Arnold Schwarzenegger called him an extraordinary athlete, a fantastic actor, and a great person. Adam Sandler, who'd worked with him on Happy Gilmore nearly 30 years earlier, called him a true great man and a great dad. The tributes came from across generations and across every corner of the industry he had touched, from the boxing world, from science fiction fandom, from comedy, from the NFL. Very few actors generate that kind of reach. Burt Young, Paulie Panino. He was born Gerald Tommaso DeLuise on April 30th, 1940, in the Corona neighborhood of Queens, New York, a borough and a neighborhood that left its particular texture on everything he ever did on screen. Before he was ever an actor, he was a Marine and a professional boxer, trained under the legendary Cus D'Amato, the same manager who would later develop Mike Tyson, with a record of 17 wins and 1 loss. He worked a string of odd jobs to support himself, cleaning carpets, driving trucks, taking whatever came. He took up acting almost by accident, accompanying a friend to meet with renowned acting teacher Lee Strasberg. The friend didn't get in. Burt Young did. He spent 2 years studying at the Actors Studio, and from there built one of the most lived-in, recognizable faces in American cinema, a face that looked like it had absorbed everything the city ever threw at it. When Stallone met him on the MGM lot, he told Young he'd written Rocky and that he had to do it. Young said he wanted to do it right away, but played it cool so he wouldn't look too eager. He recalled later that the first thing that struck him was the script, the clean, direct street prose of it. His performance as Paulie Panino, Rocky's brother-in-law, a meatpacking worker with a volatile temper and an even more volatile loneliness, earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. The nomination came alongside one for Burgess Meredith in the same film, an unusual double nod that spoke to how well the entire ensemble had performed. Paulie could easily have been written off as comic relief or pure dysfunction, but Young gave the character a sadness that made him real. He understood Paulie not as a villain, but as a man who had been passed over by life and couldn't figure out whose fault that was. He played the role in all 6 original Rocky films, and over those decades, the character quietly evolved. From the bitter, jealous brother of the first film to a man whose stubborn loyalty to Rocky became the truest, most enduring thing about him. Beyond Rocky, Young had more than 160 film and television credits. He appeared in Chinatown, 1974, The Gambler, 1974, Once Upon a Time in America, 1984, The Pope of Greenwich Village, 1984, Back to School, 1986, Last Exit to Brooklyn, 1990, and Transamerica, 2005. On television, he turned up on MASH, Miami Vice, The Sopranos, where he played veteran mobster Bobby Bacala Sr., and Law and Order. His wife, Gloria, had died in 1974, and he never remarried. He had a daughter, Anne, and a grandson. Away from the camera, he was also a painter and a writer. Some of his actual canvases appeared in a scene in Rocky Balboa, 2006, when Paulie is fired from the meatpacking plant. He published a 400-page historical novel called Endings, wrote 2 stage plays, and collaborated with the poet Gabriele Tinti on illustrated art books. He participated in the 1984 New York City Marathon and owned a restaurant in the Bronx. The picture that emerges, boxer, Marine, actor, writer, painter, restaurateur, is of a man who never stopped reaching for something to do with his hands and his mind. Burt Young died on October 8, 2023, at Northridge Hospital Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 83. His His death was the result of cardiac arrest. Stallone wrote on social media, "To my dear friend Burt Young, you were an incredible man and artist. I and the world will miss you very much." Burgess Meredith, Mickey Goldmill. He had been famous long before Rocky, born Oliver Burgess Meredith on November 16, 1907. Some sources list the year as 1909. In Cleveland, Ohio, he spent the first 4 decades of his career building one of the most varied and distinguished theatrical resumes in American history. He made his Broadway debut in 1930 and became a genuine stage star in Maxwell Anderson's Winterset, 1935, a role he repeated for his film debut the following year. In his early film career, he played George in the 1939 adaptation of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, one of the most celebrated performances of that era. He served as a captain in the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II, stationed in Italy and France, where he produced military training films and organized morale-building performances for troops, service he later described with genuine pride. In the 1950s, his career was disrupted when he was named an unfriendly witness by the House Un-American Activities Committee, the anti-communist body that upended dozens of Hollywood careers. Studio work effectively disappeared for a period. He rebuilt through television and independent projects, returning to wider prominence through The Twilight Zone in the early 1960s, where his dry intelligence and commanding presence suited the anthology format perfectly. Then came The Penguin in the Batman television series, 1966, a role that made him a household name to a generation of children, delivered with a kind of theatrical relish that was pure Meredith. By the mid-1970s, he had been nominated for Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor in consecutive years, for The Day of the Locust in 1975, and then for Rocky in 1976. 2 nominations in a row, in his late 60s, was a statement about longevity that few performers in any art form could match. His portrayal of Mickey Goldmill, the gravel-voiced, grizzled trainer who ran Mighty Mick's boxing and saw something in Rocky that everyone else had given up on, became one of the most beloved supporting performances in sports film history. Meredith spoke in interviews about why he loved the character so much, describing Mickey as a man who had been worn down by life, who had never made it himself, and who found a reason to keep going by pouring everything he had left into someone else's chance. That understanding of the character, not sentimentalized but clear-eyed, is what gave his performance such weight. The rasp in his voice, the specific way Mickey's bark contained both contempt and love, was something Meredith developed through the character, not a trick. He reprised the role in Rocky II and Rocky III, where Mickey died on screen in one of the franchise's most emotionally wrenching moments. He returned in a flashback in Rocky V. Between those films, he kept working. The Clash of the Titans, 1981, Santa Claus, the movie, 1985, and his late career warm comedies alongside Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in the Grumpy Old Men films. He described the Rocky films as something he loved from the beginning, calling the experience of being part of the phenomenon one of the unexpected joys of his long career. Beyond the screen, Meredith was a man of genuine intellectual breadth. He raised jumping horses and maintained an extensive wine cellar. He served as president of the Dolphin Foundation, which studied the communicative abilities of dolphins and other sea mammals. He had been an ardent environmentalist and an opponent of the Vietnam War. He painted the walls of his own home. He had married 4 times, including actress Paulette Goddard, Charlie Chaplin's former wife, and had 2 children. Later in his career, he played Grandpa Gustafson in Grumpy Old Men, 1993, and its sequel, lighter fare, but warmly received. His final film was Grumpier Old Men in 1995. He had developed Alzheimer's disease by then, and cast and crew worked carefully with him to help him complete the film. Burgess Meredith died on September 9, 1997, at his home in Malibu, California. He was 89. The The cause was complications from Alzheimer's disease and melanoma. His career had spanned more than 6 decades, from the Broadway stages of the 1930s to the boxing gyms of Philadelphia. He had married 4 times, had 2 children, raised jumping horses, served his country in wartime, championed civil liberties when doing so was professionally dangerous, and painted the walls of his home with his own work. A film that became a legend. Rocky was released on December 3rd, 1976. It had been made for just over $1 million, shot on the actual streets of Philadelphia with a small crew and a largely unknown cast. The idea of it winning Best Picture against films like Network, Taxi Driver, and All the President's Men seemed, at the time, almost as unlikely as a club fighter from South Philly going the distance with the world heavyweight champion. But that was always the point. The film worked because of what it understood about people who are told they can't, and go anyway. Not triumphantly, not with certainty, but with sheer refusal. Rocky doesn't win the fight. He goes 15 rounds. He hears Adrian's voice in the crowd. He stands up when the corner tells him to stay down. For audiences who had lived through Watergate, the end of Vietnam, a decade of assassinations and upheaval, there was something in that stubbornness that felt like oxygen. The film gave people permission to believe in an outcome that wasn't guaranteed, which is, in the end, the only kind of outcome worth working toward. In 2006, the Library of Congress selected Rocky for preservation in the United States National Film Registry, designating it as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. The steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Rocky Steps, have become a pilgrimage site for people from all over the world who run up them just to feel something they can't quite put into words. That's a rare thing for any film to accomplish. Most movies, even very good ones, fade. Rocky didn't fade. It settled into the culture and stayed there. What happened to the people who made it tells a similarly unglamorous, often extraordinary story. Stallone wrote himself from near nothing into film history, paid a physical price for the decades that followed, and still walks into rooms, even with a cane, as the person who made Rocky. Talia Shire carried a quiet brilliance through 2 of the most celebrated franchises in cinema, while building a family that itself became part of Hollywood's story. And she is still working at 80. Carl Weathers became a presence across 4 decades, finding new fans right up until the end, and died too soon, but left too much behind for anyone to call his life anything but extraordinary. Burt Young brought the soul of Queens to every room he entered, painted, wrote, and fought, on screen and off, until the very end. And Burgess Meredith, who had already lived more lives than most people could imagine before Mickey Goldmill ever put on a trainer's robe, proved that greatness doesn't have an expiration date and that a career built across 6 decades on the stage, in film, and on television is one of the rarest things a performer can achieve. 50 years on, the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art still draw visitors who run up them just to feel something. The film still holds, and the people who made it, still here and long gone alike, made something that outlasted all of them. If this video brought back some memories, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.